Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host, Madeline.
I'm your co-host, David.
And today, David did the research. Actually, you're the host. I'm the co-host.
But I feel like, do these terms have meaning?
I think they do. I think whoever does the bulk of it is the host, and the other person is like, I'm interjecting here and there.
Okay, I'm going to need you to interject a lot because I am less good at the talking.
I find no.
Okay.
You know how to talk. Okay, well, David just said before we started recording, this is going to be a real loose episode because I'm in a mood.
You're in a mood. You're in a good mood. You're punchy.
I'm punchy. I'm a little punchy right now. That's a nice way to put it. So before we get started in the info, let's do a little housekeeping. Join us over on Patreon, patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. If you're not there already, for $3 a month, you can access bonus content. I believe we have nearly 100 episodes up over there. We are finishing up our book club.
We've got, 2 more chapters?
2 more chapters to do. Everyday Life in the North Korean Revolution with by Susie Kim, and we will, after that, the people have requested chit-chat episodes.
I gotta say, okay, we got a Los Angeles Public Library listener. You know how I know that?
How?
There's one copy of Susie Kim's book at the Los Angeles Public Library, and it's currently checked out.
Okay.
And which is why I've been reading it as a PDF. And I do not think there is enough just like organic demand. No offense to Susie Kim, for
people love learning about North Korea.
Everyday for that specific
1945 to 1950. Yeah. Okay.
For it to be just like a thing that someone was like, I'm gonna
check this out. Well, okay, so the people have requested that after we wrap up the book club, we do some just kind of more casual, loose episodes over on the Patreon. So I think we're going to be doing maybe like, this is what's going on in current events for a couple months before we get into something a little more structured again. They want us to switch it up, so we're going to be switching up.
Can I speak specifically to that one Los Angeles Public Library person? At the moment, there's a lovely display of art in the gallery on the second floor of the downtown library that includes some work by Pippa Gardner, who just died.
Yes. R.I.P.
December 30th of last year. A lovely artist, but it also includes things from the Los Angeles patents of plants.
Oh.
So it's like a really cool blend of stuff. It's a part of, I think, the Pacific Standard Time stuff that they do around Los Angeles art shit. Yeah,
cool. Okay, so that person specifically, go check it out next time you're at the library.
When you are returning the book for me to pick up so I don't have to read it as a PDF.
We're almost done with it. We're almost through it. I think it's a really good one, interesting one. Okay, I did want to talk about something current eventsy before we get into it.
If you talk about it's the TikTok ban?
Kind of.
Are you going to
Kind of. It's more the red note thing.
Oh, yeah, I saw it.
Did you see that basically in an hour of being on Red Note, like, more American propaganda and disinformation about China has been completely dispelled with the average American than like any kind of intelligence operations on behalf of leftists have accomplished up to this point?
No, I mean, I think I found it very charming to see the internet poisoned youth of America.
Yeah.
Realize, oh wait, it's not what we've.
It's not children being forced to work in sweatshops and then they try to leap to their desks and there's nets outside of the window to catch them and they bounce them back up into the sweatshops comedically to make them work again. And
the Foxconn thing.
The Foxconn thing, and then they work. Mm-hmm. People also think that there's these like work weeks where you work like 99 hours, 6 days a week, blah 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 blah. All this stuff is like totally not real. But the flip side of this that's really interesting. So all these Americans were on there and they were like, everything I learned about China was propaganda, and all these people from China were like, don't worry, we have propaganda about you guys too. For example, we're told that you guys often have to work 2 jobs just to pay rent, and that it costs like money to take an ambulance somewhere, and if you don't pay your medical bills, you'll go into debt and have to declare bankruptcy. Like, that's not real. That's like our government's propaganda. And then all the Americans had to be like, no, that's real, actually. That's all real. And then it kind of culminated with people in China learning that in the United States, you get a ticket that you have to pay with a fine if you're homeless. And they were just like, oh shit, everything our government told us about you guys is real. And that was kind of a fun one. That's kind of like a fun.
In the defense of the American dream, the American way of life, including our beleaguered, unhoused people.
Yes.
With the hostile architecture,
right,
and the skyrocketing medical bills and the ceaseless precarity.
Ceaseless precarity. That's a good phrase to describe the American experience.
It really does make life a dramatic event. Nothing is every day. It's just like, oh, what hell I was on the train just yesterday, and a man in the midst of like a fentanyl thing said he seemed lovely, sat down next to me, and so I spent the entire train propping him up.
Right.
And that gave my life color.
Right. Yeah.
For the day.
Yeah, I have a sadder one. One of my friends had to stop a man who was very clearly in the middle of an episode of some kind from killing a woman on the street. That happened yesterday as well. Not in LA, but in New York.
Yeah.
So it is ceaseless precarity for all Americans, unfortunately.
We live the life of like an Upton Sinclair novel.
We really do.
And can your average Chinese person say that?
Can they? No, they cannot. Also, it's always hard because you're like, wow, this person next to me is clearly experiencing some sort of distress and they require assistance. I am not qualified to give it to them right now, but I'm the only one here, so I guess I gotta try.
Yeah, I mean, in the fentanyl guy case,
you felt qualified for that one.
Well, I felt like I felt qualified, but also I was like, you don't really seem in need of anything at this specific moment, other than please don't fall asleep on me.
Right, that was
right, which is not like a disgust reaction. Just to like that's how I react on like don't sleep on me on a train. Yeah. It's a reasonable request.
It is, but yeah, it is interesting. One of the things I think is interesting too, before we get into the actual episode, is there was this like I think maybe we've talked about this on the podcast before, but it feels relevant here. There was this video going viral of some people inside of a gas station, all of whom were experiencing various levels of being in need of something, like maybe in need of like actual like healthcare, like mental health care, physical health care of some kind, maybe clearly in the midst of like addiction issues that are like visible, like apparent from the outside to somebody looking on. And some like Republican guy posted it and was like, this is liberal Portland, Oregon. And then all these people were like, this is normal. This is fine. This is okay. All these liberals were like, this is normal. This is okay. And then all these socialists were like, this is not normal or okay. And it's not okay to mock these people, obviously, because this is like the direct result of not having like a social safety net or like social services in place to assist people with what they need materially. But it is very weird that the two kind of reactions to seeing this are like one, like disgust with the person, that's like the Republican kind of take, and then the Democrat take is to just normalize it to the point where nobody thinks it's a problem that needs to be solved.
No, I mean, this is why I often am like, look, the conservative shit ain't right. Like, it's not right. However, I am somehow, like, I'm more disgusted with the sort of things where it's like, can you believe that they've criminalized being unhoused from the liberal side without then doing the further point of like, why the fuck we got so many unhoused people?
Right.
Like what the fuck?
Like, can you believe that they've made it illegal to be homeless and we have not just decommodified housing?
Yeah, that seems like right. Like that's like the obvious thing where it's like right. Back during lockdown when Mitch O'Farrell, I wish I could say R.I.P.
Still alive, unfortunately.
Our former city council person colluded with like the real estate interests in Echo Park to clean up Echo Park Lake, clean up euphemistically, where there had been a large homeless encampment. The liberal reaction of like, oh no, isn't that so awful?
Let them keep camping there in tents.
Yeah, and I was like, that's not great either.
No,
man. Like that's like that sucks.
Right now, you can wish for anything you want. You could wish for them to be anywhere because it's not going to happen. So why don't you wish for them to be housed and like in homes and permanent housing that's not contingent on things like sobriety checks or, you know, I don't know, just like very, very weird.
I mean, that hypocrisy, this is the last, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
this is a subject, I don't like the sort of like liberal institutionalist mindset a lot. That's a dumb way of saying that. It's the same with immigration, where it's like the liberal position is like undocumented labor is fundamentally necessary to the American economy. Without doing the further step of it's fundamentally necessary to the American economy because the American economy is based off of labor that is like precarious in like a nearly slave labor kind of way.
Exploitative, yeah.
Right, where it's like, oh, they don't have rights, like they can be deported at any point. They don't pay into they pay into Social Security but cannot draw from it.
Right.
All of these things. And so whenever I hear like some Democrat style person being like, the immigration policy, but we need undocumented workers, and it's like
to exploit them is what you're saying. We need to be able to exploit these people who have fewer rights than American citizens. Otherwise, the jobs won't get done. And you're like, okay, this is also a problem. Are we getting there? Are we getting to have this is also a problem?
Like how? Like do the fucking next step.
Do the next step. Okay, well, this is actually a good segue point in today's episode because we were talking about labor exploitation. We were talking about, white people colonizers using.
You know what?
Using different people, right, as an exploited labor source. Not obviously immigrants into the United States, but...
And we're going to talk... okay, we're going to do it. I see you transitioning.
Okay, you got a better one?
Okay.
Okay, I trust
I
you.
think
Take
we
over.
got... You know what? We got to make America great again. And we got to...
Nobody clip that. Nobody clip David saying that.
We have to think about one of the great Americans of the 20th century, Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson.
This is okay. So on March 15th of 1936,
that was smooth. I just have to say. Okay, we're in it. All right.
Paul Robeson, who was by then one of the most accomplished Americans, like maybe in like American history sort of thing. He had been a Yale football star, one of the first black men to go to Yale. He was an acclaimed film and theater actor. He spoke like 5 or 6 languages. Wow. He was also a committed Marxist.
Okay, Paul.
You can look up his speech before the House Un-American Activities Committee online. It's great stuff. So he took the stage of London's Westminster Theatre in the title role of Toussaint Louverture, the only successful slave revolt in history. A 2-act play that was written by Trinidadian historian and playwright C.L.R. James. Robeson had at the time been trying to break the cycle of really demeaning depictions of black men in American film and theater by looking for test pieces that were financially less lucrative, though richer in narrative forms in which to try out more positive but also less two-dimensional roles for black actors. Robeson and James actually initially found themselves ideologically out of steps. James was a committed Trotskyist who had been a part of the Pan-African League with fellow Caribbean historian George Padmore, who had just left the Soviet Union in disgust over the purges and show trials.
Got it.
And Robeson was firmly like a committed like Marxist-Leninist, I'm Soviet to the fucking bone.
They're us.
Kind of thing. It's a great little...
Yeah,
It's a buddy comedy waiting to happen.
It really is.
So the performance was the first time in which an all-black cast performed a work by a black playwright on an English stage. In fact, the play was performed privately in order to escape the censure of British authorities and who might object to the themes of black liberation. And this, by the way, at the height of British colonial presence in the West Indies.
Yeah.
So...
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is making sense.
So James had written it 2 years earlier, but the origins lay even earlier in 1930 when James, then only just a few years in England, had written a riposte to famed English historian James Anthony Froude. I don't know how you fucking say that.
It's not Freud?
Froude, who'd argued for the inherent racial inferiority of the black population of England's colonial holdings.
Oh, it's douchebag is how it's pronounced.
Oh, yeah. He'd also written an earlier hagiographic account of Oliver Cromwell's time in Ireland, callback. So he'd been like, that Oliver Cromwell guy didn't go far enough.
Wow.
That was...
So this is an evil man.
And he'd also written an argument in favor of the use of forced labor in apartheid South Africa.
A very evil man. He's got all of the bad takes.
So...
he's like, how much racism can I do?
Yeah, he did
Show me anywhere, I'll do the racism now.
And the funny thing is, like, right at the time, Froude was like a very well respected. He was who's the lady who writes the Supreme Court, like the presidential histories. The one it's like if you're like I want to be a smart person who like reads things that are on the New York Times bestseller list that aren't.
You read my book.
But like he was Britain's that lady.
Okay, got it.
Right, of like the late 19th, early 20th century.
It is absolutely mind-boggling when you go back in history and you see just, like, eugenics super normalized, colonial exploitation of indigenous people super normalized, and then you think about all the things that are super normalized today that, you know, a century from now people are going to look back on in horror. It's like an endless cycle of us trying to justify the most horrific forms of, like, human exploitation on the planet to uphold, like, capitalism.
Yeah, and it's James, again, a Trinidadian, and this is an aside about James, who also, like, the other thing about this is that you have two of the most accomplished men of their generation, C.L.R. James and Paul Robeson, intersecting. It seems like there was going to be a film version of Toussaint Louverture that would have been directed by Sergei Eisenstein, of Battleship Potemkin fame, and that never happened because Eisenstein died before it could. But that would have been everything. It's like the best director of his generation directing a play by one of the, like, best historians of his generation, performed by one of the best actors of his generation. But so in the essay that eventually became 1932's The Case for Caribbean Self-Government, which was actually published by the Bloomsbury Group of, like, Virginia Woolf type fame.
Okay.
James wrote that encountering Froude's claims, he would, quote, much rather just talk about Toussaint Louverture than about Froude. Louverture, as one of the heroes of the Haitian Revolution, was to figure as a powerful symbol within the then nascent Pan-Africanist anti-colonial movement. The Haitian Revolution itself became a touchstone of a growing theoretical engagement by a lot of Caribbean writers with what one theorist called the Caribbean quarrel with history. At the time, from about 1915 to 1934, the United States Expeditionary Force, a forerunner to the Marines, was occupying Haiti in order to keep Haiti available for foreign land ownership. And Haiti was still also a decade away from repaying France for the loss of France's slave population in Haiti.
So wild.
And by the way, France to this day has not acknowledged that they made the Haitian people pay them back.
Yeah.
For being freed.
Yeah. I actually saw this, like, court case about how that Haiti, like, is like an international court kind of, you know, hypothesizing, done by these legal scholars. It's like, Haiti has a really good case in international court for making France repay them all the money that they paid them over the years, because all of these things are probably illegal in an international court setting. I believe there will be a link to it in the sources, but I don't talk about it much in this episode, but it was really fascinating because I'm like, can you imagine that wealth exchange from France back to Haiti?
No, I mean, especially, like,
enforced?
You know, adjust it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like Haiti, a country that has become in the 21st century a byword for, like, the sort of failure of post-colonial states among kind of liberal ass motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Right. Spent the first century and a half of its existence as a free state paying off the stupid debt.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know. I think, you know, France owes them their money back. They also owe them fucking reparations.
Yeah. Very, very intense.
So 2 years after the play, James published Black Jacobins. In the 1938 introduction to the first edition, James wrote that the transformation of slaves trembling in hundreds before a single white man into a people able to organize themselves and defeat the most powerful European nations of their day is one of the great epics of revolutionary struggle and achievement. Drawing a direct connection between the slave society of 18th century Haiti and the conditions of contemporary Europe. And throughout the book, he is constantly at pains to be like, hey, readers in 1938 Europe, are you noticing the similarities?
Oh.
Like, and it's like an over and over thing. And historiography has sort of moved on from the way James wrote it, because he wrote it in this extraordinarily heroic style. He was deeply, deeply influenced by Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution. And so he was like, I'm going to write it like that. And so a lot of historians these days are like, that's maybe not the thing. But I think as a touchstone for a generation of Black liberationist thinkers in the sort of Pan-Africanist movement, the Black Jacobins is like a perfect text. Reviews of the play were generally positive, specifically referring to Robeson's exemplary performances, magnificent and great and earnest and fine and powerful and passionate and magnanimous and moving. And he's often called a genius, but they also tend to adopt a kind of condescending tone about the play and characterize it and its cast as marginal. In doing so, they continued a history of the marginalization of the Haitian Revolution itself within Western historiography of the Age of Revolution. For Caribbean thinkers, on the other hand, the Haitian Revolution loomed large. Amy Cesaire, a Martinican poet who we're going to talk about a lot in the next episode, was to name Haiti, where, quote, negritude rose to its feet for the first time and said it believed in its own humanity. In the opening verses to a poem dedicated to Haitian Marxist poet René Depestre, Cesaire exhorted his friend to, quote, recall the insane song of Boukman delivering your country with the forceps of a storm. Boukman was a maroon voodoo practitioner and Haitian revolutionary whose song had become kind of a sort of like Haitian folk song by the 20th century. And so this is interesting. You're a little Stalinist, Marxist, yada, yada, yada.
For me. It's just for me. Okay,
right, so Cesaire was a part of this generation, which included James as well as like Frantz Fanon and George Padmore and all of these sort of black intellectuals who had come from the colonial periphery to the metropole and were usually extraordinarily well educated and experienced their blackness as blackness in the metropole, because they, like, James had thought, I'm like a British subject, I love cricket. Yeah. And then he got to London and was like, oh, there's a difference. And Cesaire had the same experience and had been sort of among a group of black radicals in Paris in the 20s and 30s. And Depestre was a more like hardline Marxist who was really, really frustrated by Cesaire's invocation of sort of like earlier poetic and ideological forms derived from the experience of black slaves in the Caribbean. So he was like, we're all doing constructivism. Why aren't you doing constructivism? Why are you doing all this shit that sounds like surrealism and then like slave stuff? What the fuck is that? And so you see that kind of like within sort of like the narrative of black Caribbean thinkers, especially with the Haitian Revolution, that it's like, this is a source of liberatory thinking that stands outside of the Marxist tradition and that can inform a Marxist thinking.
Yes.
So
totally.
that's where I'm going.
I like that. That also seems relevant to when we were reading Cedric Robinson a little bit.
Yeah, and that's like my Cedric Robinson was like the start of me sort of troubling my readings of Marx. And so I think this is sort of like one of the sort of outcomes of that. Yeah,
if you guys haven't read Black Marxism, I think it does a really good job, especially in the time of, you know, people talk about identity politics a lot and class politics and how they interact with each other, and I think that Cedric Robinson does a really good job of kind of, I don't know, I think that there's like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like a marrying of concepts, but he presents these ideas in a way that points to like the trouble in traditional like thought styles of trying to reconcile these things, and he comes up with a pretty good reconciliation of them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Robinson, I think, just wants a committed Marxist himself. Yes, right?
Exactly.
Like, wanted Marxists to think more critically about where sort of like what revolution would look like and what revolutionary, like what sources of revolution could be. And another aside, like in like recent sort of academic circles, I guess recent being like the last 30 years, there has been a move that is inspired by James and Cesaire and thinkers like them to use the sort of like the Caribbean as an example of a kind of thinking that emphasizes rupture in Marxist thinking as opposed to continuity, which a lot of like sort of by the books Marxism is like continuity to the end, and it's oftentimes referred to as archipelagic thinking, like referring to the archipelago. So I think today we're going to go over the history of Haiti's initial colonization, the genocide of the indigenous Taino people, and the rise of the colonial plantation system of Haiti, then called, wait, I'm going to do it. Saint Domingo.
Oh, dang it, pronunciations.
And then we're going to talk about the ways in which the Saint Domingue colony conditioned the political economy of 17th and 18th century France, and the ways in which some of the contradictions generated by the immense wealth of the colony manifested themselves in the French Revolution. We're going to describe the persistent and systematic attempts by the slaves to resist their enslavement, culminating finally in a full-scale revolt and eventual self-government. And then we're going to talk about some of the liberatory but also tragic aftermath of the Haitian Revolution. I have this as a Google Doc, so if we can figure out, because I would like all my sources, and especially all the primary sources, to be there for people. So
in a Google Doc, we can do that. I've done that with some other episodes where we've had a lot of sources before. We've just uploaded a link to a Google Doc you guys can view that have all the sources in them, because they don't all fit in the descriptions all the time. So you guys know all of our episodes are sourced and cited. Usually if you just hit show more, if you're in Spotify or maybe even an Apple podcast, I'm not familiar with it there, it'll show you under sources either a whole bunch of links when those are all the sources, or one link and it goes straight to a Google Doc with everything on it. So that's probably what we'll do for these as well.
Yeah, and in this case, it's books. It's like a lot
it's some books.
It's some fucking
got
books.
A bunch of books. Yeah.
So Madeline, complete the sentence. In 1492, Columbus.
So the ocean blue.
Yeah. Well, wrong. In 1492, Columbus began a genocide which eventually claimed the life of nearly the entire population of the island of what was then called San Domingo, with estimates suggesting that over the course of his 4 voyages, Columbus's explorers caused either through disease, forced labor, or outright murder the deaths of around 700,000 indigenous people.
Is that just in what's present-day Haiti?
That's just
numbers?
in what's present.
Wow.
Well, Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Okay, the Dominican. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's horrifying.
So on the first voyage, Columbus left behind a small group of sailors because one of the ships had sunk, and so he couldn't take them back with him.
Okay, a little bit of karmic justice, I guess.
On an island that the Taino people, who were then living there, called Haiti, he called it La Española.
Oh, God, that name even. It's just so disrespectful. It's wild. Okay.
When he returned the next year, he found that the settlement was abandoned and the graves of the sailors nearby.
Good. I'm glad.
The Taino authority at the time, to whom he'd entrusted the settlement, reported that a group of Caribs from a neighboring island had attacked the settlement. Du Bois at the time tells us that it's more likely than not that, quote, not for the last time, the initial peace between Europeans and the indigenous people devolved into violence. Under the quote-unquote Encomendia system, the Spanish... There we go, thank you. The Spanish were entitled to the free labor of the Taino people in order to mine precious metals. Through overwork, disease, and massacre, the population fell from an estimated 500 to 750,000 in 1492 to 29,000 by 1514.
Wow, that is not very long.
Yeah.
That is, what, 14, that's 22 years?
So, just a little...
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's bad. It's not great. So the Taino people were not one people, but several. They lacked an overall name in Columbus's time, and members seem to refer to themselves by the localities in which they lived. Those living in what is now Puerto Rico called themselves the Boricuin, their name for the island, and those in the Bahamian archipelago called themselves the Lusayo. And so exploration was not Columbus's only objective. He was like looking for gold and other kinds of wealth to benefit himself, and he insisted that he and his family be granted title to any land he colonized, and he indemnified the king and queen of Spain for the expenses they had incurred on his behalf.
Wow.
So the Tainos called the island, which we now think of as Haiti and the Dominican Republic, as Guanahani. Columbus took possession of it in the name of the king and queen of Spain and renamed it San Salvador. The inadequacy of his documentation and the consequent difficulty in plotting his course have made it basically impossible to figure out exactly where he was. Samuel Morrison made a thorough study of the documents and checked them by retracing Columbus's course in a sailing boat, placed it as centrally located Watling Island. On his first voyage, Columbus took aboard 6 Tainos, intending to teach them Spanish so that they could interpret for him and carry them to Spain to show his royal sponsors.
So
he fucking kidnapped 6 people.
This is so horrifying. I mean, it's like, colonization is horrifying, and you hear about these things en masse, and then it's like every small instance of it occurring, you're just like, this is fucked. Oh, this is bad. Oh, this is fucked. And it's just absolutely shocking to hear every single encounter.
Yeah, so they directed him to Cuba, first of all, after he was inquiring for gold. And then the Taino in Cuba directed them to La Española, modern-day Haiti. He was well received by Guacanagari, the local chief, and he was pleased to observe the presence of gold ornaments.
I bet he was, that sick fuck.
And Jesus. So the Santa Maria founders, and he leaves behind a colony. He returned the following year. His objectives were not only to, quote-unquote, rescue the sailors he'd left behind at La Navidad and to complete the exploration of the Greater Antilles, cut short by the shipwreck, but also to found a colony. So when he arrived on November 28th of 1493, of course, he found the fort in ruins. He proceeded to settle Hispaniola. From January to April, he builds a town called Isabella after the queen and sends prospectors into the interior looking for gold. By April 24th of 1494, he resumed his previous exploration, sailing to Cuba and explored the southern coast of Cuba. Around this time, he commissioned Father Ramon Panay's study of native religion. Panay obtained information from the Tainos who lived in the vicinity of Isabella and its gold field. His work has been termed the first anthropological research in the New World, and his report the first literature written there. He devoted most of his attention to affairs of state in Hispaniola, which did not go well. The mines were less profitable than he expected, and seed crops brought from Spain proved to be unsuited to the tropics, and the accompanying livestock had to be consumed for the colonists who were unable to grow sufficient food or to obtain food from the neighboring Tainos. The king and queen were obliged to send additional supplies. After 2 more voyages, the Spanish crown removed Columbus and appointed a permanent governor because he was like a charlatan. Like, he wasn't a colonist. He was like a genocider. Like that, and
everything you hear about Columbus, he's just some showboat fucking psychopath.
Yeah.
Armchair diagnosis of Christopher Columbus. Psychopathic.
I think we're gonna... I think 750 on the high end to about 24,000.
Well, and a psychopathy, criminal justice term, are you likely to reoffend? It actually comes from the court system and the prison system.
He had 4 voyages.
Likely to reoffend. I'm going with it. This guy is... It's horrific. It's that same thing. It's like every individual story you hear about Christopher Columbus, like interacting with anybody, you're just like, oh my god, this is so fucking bad.
So, Bartolomé de las Casas, arriving in La Española in 1502, and he was the first priest ordained in the Americas, described the brutality exacted on the Taino people thus: "Our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder, then, if they tried to kill one of us now and then." Presaging the French treatment of slaves a century later, de las Casas wrote that if it was a general rule among the Spaniards to be cruel, not just cruel, but extraordinarily cruel, so that harsh and bitter treatment would prevent Indians from daring to think of themselves as human beings or having a moment to think at all. By 1531, there were an estimated 600 remaining Taino.
Wow.
So there's some research that is extraordinarily emphatic that there are surviving Taino, but realistically, that is in a very desiccated,
very limited capacity.
Yeah,
it's just genocide.
Much of what is known about the Taino people is reconstructed through archaeological records and the accounts of Europeans like de las Casas. I will say about de las Casas. So he was like, this is fucked. What the fuck are we doing? This is fucked. You know what we should do? Get Africans.
Oh my god, what? Oh god, okay.
So, I think it's either the second or third voyage, Columbus brought with him dogs, specifically mastiffs and greyhounds, to terrorize the indigenous population.
He's just
further.
he's just fucking. It's all atrocious. It's like, think about the worst thing you can imagine human beings doing to each other. Christopher Columbus was doing this every place he went to so many people. It's just terrible.
Yeah, it's I mean, at this point, I feel like it is orthodoxy that it's Indigenous Peoples Day, not Columbus Day, yada yada yada.
Yes.
And I think, generally speaking, people pass over his crimes with like a sort of like, he was a bad man. It's worth just mentioning how bad and like, just like, right, because we don't have a tremendous amount to go on about the Taino people, to just put in there that they existed, they were there. And
they suffered greatly because of the greed and ambition of European colonizers.
And it does seem as though Taino was their word for themselves to mean good or noble, as opposed by which they differentiated themselves from the neighboring Carib people of other islands. Which, like, that's its own story, but it does seem like it was a peaceful sort of group of people. Like, that's... for what it doesn't matter. The Caribs also suffered a genocide.
Yeah, it's horrible, and it's like some of the stuff that we talk about later about, like the colony, right? Like that emerges from all of this, like the colony we think of today, as having existed there. Like the treatment of the enslaved people there, some of it is so horrific and barbaric that as I was reading it, I was like getting nauseous, and I was like, we can't even mention this on the podcast, I don't think, because acknowledging it is. Because it's so horrible. It's like one of those things where you're like, I don't even know if it's good for everybody to know, or if it's like we would somehow be profiting off of like the horror of what these people experienced. Like that's how bad the treatment was that emerges from this whole system. It starts bad and it stays bad for a really, really, really long time in ways that are shocking to even consider. Like you hear about like people listening to like true crime podcasts because it's so sensational. Yeah. This is more sensational than anything that's ever happened in a true crime podcast, and it didn't happen to one person. It happened to hundreds of thousands of people.
Over 1 million just by the French alone.
Yeah. It's very, very,
and
very bad.
I will say, and like I like did a like we should do a content warning here thing, because I was like, it is important to like describe some of it, though I tried to be sparing. It's like a paragraph or two as opposed to like a whole fucking
I think that's what we usually try to do. We try to let you know what happened. We try not to dwell on it too much. We try not to over sensationalize it. We try not to make light of it, and we also try not to gloss over it and pretend it didn't occur. So content warning, everything bad you can think of will probably be appearing here. Yeah,
so back to those mastiffs and greyhounds, also content warning. An 18th century account by French diarist Moreau de Sainte-Marie recorded the skulls of 5 indigenous people had been found in a cave in the north of the colony. Moreau wrote that no other bones were found because, quote, the Spanish had dogs to whom they gave over the corpses of their unfortunate victims. Everywhere, he continued, you find their bones, their simple but ingenious utensils, their hideous but sometimes very artistically made fetishes. Continuing, some new vestiges of the existence of this now erased from this list of humans has to be recorded. And so, Moreau was like a liberal, right? Like he was like, this is really bad, and the excesses of French colonialism, or at the time Spanish colonialism, are going to lead to the end of the French Empire because it's so bad that we're going to fucking destroy ourselves. And he was right. So somewhat ahead of that, Alexander VI, that's the Borgia Pope, had issued a papal bull called the Inter Caetera, which authorized Spain and Portugal as the sole colonizers of the Americas, further authorizing the enslavement of black Africans. The bull read in part, and this is a long quote, out of our sole largesse and certain knowledge, and out of the fullness of our apostolic power, by the authority of Almighty God, conferred upon us in the blessed Peter, and of the vicarship of Jesus Christ, which we hold on earth, do by tenor of these presents, should any of said islands have been found by your envoys and captains, give, grant, and assign to you and your heirs and successors, kings of Castile and Leon, forever, together with all their dominions, cities, camps, places, and villages, and all rights, jurisdictions, and appurtenances, all islands and mainlands discovered and to be discovered toward the west and south by drawing and establishing a line from the Arctic Pole, namely to the north, the Antarctic... Okay, we're going to skip by some of this. Basically, the fucking thing is, the initial plan was Portugal would get Africa, and Spain would get South America and the Caribbean, and they did not like that. Well, Portugal specifically was like, we're not fucking with that. Like, we also want to do genocide in, the Western Hemisphere. So Portugal got Brazil.
Wow.
So they found this insufficient, and they reached a further agreement at the Treaty of Tordesillas, whereby Spain ceded control over Brazil to Portugal in exchange for dominion over the Caribbean. Neither the treaty nor the papal bulls accounted for the other European powers' claims in the Americas.
I was going to ask about that. It was like, nobody else matters here. They're just, certainly not the indigenous people in these places that they're laying claim to. We know that because they are horrific racists who feel entitled to carve up the world for their own profit. But I was surprised that there wasn't even a challenge from other horrific racists who were basically trying to carve up the world.
Immediately, everyone was like, what the fuck, man? Well, like, I guess, like, all the rich assholes of Europe were like, what the fuck, man? Francis I of France declared, for example, "The sun shines for me as for others. I should very much like to see the clause in Adam's will that excludes me from my share of the world."
Oh, God.
In 1580, the English government asserted the principle of effective occupation as the determinant of sovereignty. Madeline, it's in the name. What's effective occupation?
Effective occupation? What? It's like settler colonization, right? What do you
mean? It's basically we just go there. We're there. We're the people fucking here.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah. It's ours
Pope.
now. Yeah.
So this essentially made colonization a race to the finish line. Santo Domingo, the capital of La Española, flourished and boasted the first Catholic cathedral and the first European university in the Americas. As the Spanish expanded their colonies to Mexico and Florida, La Española declined. The sugar economy had more or less disappeared by the end of the 16th century, and by the end of the 17th century, only a few scattered cattle ranches were the economy of the island. At the end of the 17th century, the French settled the island, translating the Spanish Santo Domingo into the French Saint-Domingue.
Saint-Domingue.
Portuguese ships laden with gold and silver mined from the forced labor camps of the Caribbean and South America left the new colony. The English established colonies first in St. Christopher before expanding to the Barbados. Barbados, by the way, developed at such a rapid pace that the overcrowded settlers left the island to establish a colony on the mainland of North America, South Carolina.
Interesting.
The French, meanwhile, established colonies in Martinique and Guadeloupe. The indigenous Caribs at first kind of managed to eke out an existence by playing both the English and French against one another, but by the 18th century there were only a few scattered Carib settlements remaining. The first permanent French settlements in Saint-Domingue were basically pirates, what they called flibustiers, and buccaneers, basically small traders because of the indigenous method of smoking the wild cattle meat, which they sold to pirates. Which is like, it's a little slap in the face that it's like the people who you genocided, you're using their method and name for cultivation of meat.
Yeah.
In order to fucking colonize them.
I mean, that's how I feel in the United States. How, like, one of the things that always stood out to me, even when I was a little kid, is, like, our summer camps and national park systems.
Oh, yeah.
How they are almost performatively named after things that are relevant to the people we committed genocide against when we came here.
And what's funny is, I mentioned to you before we started recording, and what we'll get to by the end of it, or by probably next week, which is that when the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue got their fucking freedom and were picking what to name the colony or their new country, they called it Haiti, which is their attempt to reclaim Haiti, the Taino word, right? Like,
right. Right. Yeah, the names are very, very fascinating, and they do carry so much weight, for these experiences. Like, just even when you said, like, oh, okay, yeah, and then the Spanish, they named it Española.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, fuck you.
Yeah,
like, come on. New Mexico. Yeah, like things like that where you're like, okay, we're just like colonizing and naming things after things that are named after things that are named after the European colonizers.
Yeah, so that's, by 1659, the French had established a basically permanent colony. In 1664, France appointed a royal governor to Saint-Domingue. This governor, Bernard de Orgeron, began to recruit settlers from the native Anjou region of France. Between 1664 and 1680, the population of the newly formed French colony grew from a scattered 400 flibustiers and buccaneers to 4,000 settlers. In 1697, a French commander arrived in Domingo and attacked the Spanish city of Cartagena, calling upon the flibustiers and buccaneers as well as Negroes, quote, to join him in the attack. Among the participants in the siege of Cartagena was Joseph d'Honneur de Galifet, who invested his spoils in the land of Saint Domingo. Pay attention to that name. The Galifet sugar plantations eventually grew to be some of the most profitable in the world.
Wow.
Cartagena's capture eventually led to the 1697 of Ryswick, which finally transitioned Saint-Domingue from a Spanish holding to a French one.
Okay, so 1697, the treaty is passed, and this is officially when it becomes the colony as we think of it.
The colony as we think of it.
That eventually will become Haiti.
And it became essentially the jewel in the French colonial system. The first plantations were worked by both African slaves and French engagés. My pronunciation of everything sucks.
Mine as well.
So, sorry, y'all.
Basically, sorry to the French, kind of. Not sorry to the French. If you're French, deal with it.
I mean,
in the context of what we're talking about, this is not the biggest problem.
So the first plantations, as I said, African slaves and French engagés, indentured servants. But the problem with indenture is that it had an essentially democratizing effect on the white population. As Eric Williams, by the way, first independent president of Trinidad and one of C.L.R. James's students.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's a whole ass crazy story there. Noted where land was available, engagé labor, because of its defined period, tended to promote the expansion of small landholders and yeoman farmers over large capitalist agricultural production.
Oh, interesting.
So basically, like, right, it's like you get done being like an indentured servant and you're like, I'm gonna go over here and do like cattle and maybe like a little coffee, something, but I'm not trying to do like a giant ass fucking sugar plantation, which is extremely labor intensive and needs a lot of land and labor.
Right.
Precisely because the slave could be regarded as basically a fixed capital cost because the slave could not become free, slavery was the necessary condition for the development of capitalism.
That's a little Cedric Robinson in there, right?
It's also Eric Williams. It's also like...
this is like the black Marx. This is what I'm talking about, how like some of like the black Marxist ideology will reconcile some pieces of Marx when you're... I mean, admittedly, when you're kind of in the weeds with it and you're like, I'm not sure if I agree with where Marx is classifying slavery, for example. Like, the black Marxist thought really does a good job of reconciling these ideas, and that's, like, an important part of it. So.
Yeah, so essentially, right, like, the fact that everyone knew, because, like, sugar had been planted for a while, that there was immense profit to be made in sugar cultivation in the New World. But they needed slaves, and obviously they had committed a genocide so completely that, like, the indigenous population could no longer be slaves.
Yeah.
So it took importing black slaves to basically create the conditions for capitalism, which also meant that the sort of racialized ideology that justified slavery was a product of a specifically material concern as opposed to the other, right? Like, where people tend to think of slavery or like the sort of ideological racialized stuff in a vacuum. No, it was like specifically the product of the like necessary conditions for the formation of capitalism. As William writes of the ideological foundations of slavery, here then is the origin of Negro slavery. The reason was economic, not racial. It had to do not with the color of the laborer, but with the cheapness of the labor. As compared with the Indian and white labor, Negro slavery was eminently superior. In each case, writes Bassett, discussing North Carolina, it was a survival of the fittest. Both Indian slavery and white servitude were to go down before the black man's superior endurance, docility, and labor capacity. The features of the man, his hair, color, or dentifrice, its subhuman characteristics so widely pleaded were only the later rationalizations to justify a simple economic fact that the colonies needed labor and resorted to Negro labor because it was cheapest and best. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is like a pretty big deal if you're a Marxist to like this. Is this what you were talking about, David, when you were thinking like, oh, like reading like Robinson, for example, like made me kind of rethink some things about Marx? Was this what you were kind of referring to?
I mean, this was a part of it, right? I was specifically, there's a chapter in that book about Richard Wright, and comically there's this really fun interview I'll look for and try to post it with C.L.R. James from later in his life, where he also goes back to Richard Wright and to Native Son, Richard Wright's novel, and he's talking about how committing a crime is at the heart of their sort of like the protagonist sort of like understanding of themselves as liberated, right? And that it like it's standing outside of the legal system. And both Robinson and James are really, really interested in the sort of like those moments of rupture. Again, I sound like I'm just going to say that over and over again, but right, like those moments where like the sort of like ideological and material conditions are at such at odds that you can no longer hold the ideological justification for the material, which becomes manifested sort of symbolically in crime, right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting place to go.
That is interesting.
And then, you know, if you know anything about the Haitian Revolution, and for like the century after the Haitian Revolution, it was notorious among European historians for its cruelty and violence, which is hard to stomach when you think about the cruelty and violence of the French colonial.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like anything would be justified in the situation,
and we'll get to that.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like there is no form of resistance that is too far when you are experiencing oppression of that kind.
And I I have been thinking a lot about, like, I don't know, like, I've just been thinking a lot about the ways in which the sort of, like, that kind of thinking about those contradictions informs the sort of Gramsci understanding of, like, organic intellectuals, who constitutes an organic intellectual, what constitutes a sort of, like, hegemonic ideology. It's all real weedsy bullshit. But Cedric Robinson, fucking great. Black Marxism. We'll put a link to something.
I mean, I feel like it is good recommended reading. It is a very dry academic text.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, I think that we read it. We did an actual IRL book club with it here in LA a couple years ago, and it's a very, very valuable read, especially because I think that if you're familiar with Marx, you see him often stumble through questions that pertain to like racialization and like colonization and change. That's true. Yeah. You see him kind of stumble through that stuff, and if you do consider yourself a Marxist, obviously you understand that your ideology is scientific, it's not utopian, and science changes as you're presented with new information. And I think that Cedric Robinson brings about a lot of new information that makes sense within a framework of Marxism that is not anti-Marxist, that is Marxist, and actually strengthens the ideology and makes it more comprehensive, more complete.
And it's also, I mean, I've never been like an orthodox type like that's just not who I am. Right. Like I'm not like
Marx wasn't even an orthodox Marxist. Like, his own opinions about things changed as he was exposed to more implementations of his ideas, saw more revolutions play out, you know.
Yeah, so the original French settlers, they were growing tobacco because it was easy as shit to grow. And so they were like, we can just do this. But as they got more wealthy, they began planting the more lucrative sugarcane. French King Louis XIV's minister Colbert granted first to the Compagnie des Indes Occidentales.
That French. Was that French? Compagnie des Indes Occidentales.
Yeah, whatever the fuck that is. 1664. My fucking Google Doc's gonna be up here, so it's got that. Like, you all can figure out how to say that. And his successors, the Compagnie du Senegal and the Compagnie du Guinea. That should tell you what these companies are about. Yeah. Exclusive control over the slave trade within the French colonies. Responding to the explosive growth of the slave trade, Louis issued the 1685 Code Noir, an attempt to formalize French national policy towards enslaved people. However, the Code Noir, subtitled "The Policy on the Islands of America," itself contained a contradiction. It was, writes Sue Peabody, designed to bring Catholicism to the heathen and curb the abuses of cruel masters across the sea. It did not, however, apply to the treatment of slaves in France. In the French metropole, it was different. A century earlier, a Norman slave trader arriving in Bordeaux attempted to sell his cargo of slaves. He was immediately arrested, and the enslaved people were freed.
Oh, wow.
The tradition of freeing slaves upon arrival, writes Peabody, in a French city extends back to a time prior to the transatlantic slave trade. In 1402, for example, 4 slaves escaped from Perpignan to Toulouse. Their masters followed them in an attempt to reclaim them, but the city's syndic intervened, ruling that by the privilege of the city, any slave who set foot within its suburbs was free.
So basically, what we're seeing here is that in France, they've got a lot of cool anti-slavery shit going on, but France has colonies that are just full of enslaved people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so by the time of Louis XIV, this creates a problem. In 1691, for instance, Secretary of State Pontchartrain commented on the situation of a pair of stowaway slaves who made it to France. Quote, "The king has been informed that 2 Negroes from Martinique crossed on the ship Loiseau, His Majesty, to punish Sir Chevalier de Hare, who commanded the ship, for not having paid enough attention to prevent them from embarking, gives order to Sir Colbert," that's a misspelling in my thing, "to withhold the price of them from his salary at the cost of 300 livres for each one, and to remit it to the rider of the ship Le Valiant to pay, following your orders, the owners of the Negroes." So, in other words, the French monarchy made it the policy that any enslaved person who set foot in France was free. However, their former owners were to be reimbursed by the ship's captain, careless enough to let them set foot on France in the first place.
Okay, all right. So real mixed signals.
I think, right, like this, especially probably next episode when we get to the intersection of the French Revolution and Haiti.
Yeah.
Saint-Domingue. Like, the French revolutionaries do not know what to fucking do with all these enslaved people. And, like, free people of color and mixed race people send over representatives to the the French Revolutionary National Assembly at various points. Because they're like, oh, shit, we're free. Cool.
Yeah.
And then, like, everyone's like, oh, we can't really...
They're like, no, actually. It's like that time in AP European History class in high school where I had to pretend to be Catherine the Great for, like, a mock conversation. Mm-hmm. And I had to defend Catherine the Great keeping slavery around.
Yeah.
Or serfdom.
Serfdom.
It was serfdom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember I was like, this is the worst person I could have had to be, because how do you position yourself as, like, enlightened or forward thinking and that you're okay with this, like, brutal oppressive system? Uh-huh. There is no way to reconcile these two things. You cannot. And they were like, we're gonna do it anyway, even though you cannot intellectually rationalize this.
So 1715, I remember, okay, first of all, step back. I remember that Catherine the Great thing.
It was horrible. At a certain point, I just had to yell, the serfs can't be trusted to make decisions for themselves. And
the funny thing is, I remember the guy who we had, like, a project with later in that year, who was like your debate counterpart or whatever in that debate.
Oh, yeah, because I was, as Catherine, this was a fucked up assignment. Also, our teacher's kind of mean, so I had to pretend to be Catherine the Great and debate a guy pretending to be who?
I think he
some
was
other historical
some other
figure,
motherfucker.
And then you have to defend the actions of all these horrible leaders because they're you.
Yeah.
To each other. Well, and there's no way to do it, so which is why I eventually was just like, the serfs, I wanted to free them. I did. I didn't, though, because they are stupid and bad.
Uh-huh.
And they can't be in control of themselves. So you think back on this, you're like, you're literally making a high school kid justify, like, serfdom.
I mean, I will say that guy, the guy who was her debate counterpart, had made it his policy that he would not turn in any homework because our teacher had said that anyone who passes the AP exam at the end of the year will get an A. I think what that meant is that he also did not do any homework, because I remember the dumbfounded look on his face when he was at, like, sitting across from your angry Chihuahua ass self.
Yeah, that's me.
16 or whatever.
Yeah, it was even worse back then, if you can imagine.
Just being like, I have fucking nothing. I got, like, and I was like, yeah, you both have fucking nothing. This is crazy. Like,
I mean, I had nothing for very different reasons. There was nothing I could have. I think at one point the teacher started making me defend myself. Because he wasn't doing anything. And I was like... I will say, as a postscript to that little trip down memory lane, I do recall that he did not, in fact, pass the AP exam. Oh, wow.
And so the gamble on not doing his homework...
He failed the class, too.
Which also, those AP exams are easy as fuck. I don't know what he was...
They're not that easy.
I was like...
What'd you get on that test?
I got a 4 or 5.
I got a 4. I got a 4 because I messed up some years of an event by, like, 5 years.
I don't know. I don't think I ever didn't pass an AP exam, because it was like...
David over here.
It's a fucking standard...
Okay, so if you've ever failed an AP exam... The important thing to know is that David thinks he's better than you.
No, I'm just saying. Okay, I have one of those stupid brains that finds standardized tests almost comically, like, just like...
now you're rubbing salt in the wound.
No, but that's
he's leaning in.
That is not like a statement about my intelligence. It's a statement about the fact that standardized tests just fit my particular thing, where I'm just like, oh, okay, this is fine. We went to go see... Like the what's the one, the Signs. We went to go see Signs.
The movie about the aliens?
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. We did that?
The night before SATs.
Oh. I remember we did something else the night before SATs, because I showed up to take the SATs drunk, and a kid named Ori had to loan me a calculator, and I didn't have a pencil. So I'm pretty sure I must have gone to a punk show after
you were drunk.
Signs.
I did not.
Okay, so I was engaging in teenage debauchery.
Yeah, I was like, but I remember very specifically my dad woke me up and was like, you have SATs today. And because we'd graduated a year early, I hadn't been in high school for like 6 months and had completely forgotten that the SATs existed.
Right.
And I was like, and I did very well. I can't remember what I got, but I did very well.
Okay, so David thinks he's smarter and better than all of us lowly peons out here in the world, and that's why he's a doctor, but I still get to make fun of him.
I think standardized tests are a poor measure of intelligence.
But you know what they are a great measure of?
Being an asshole.
They're a great measure of your ethnicity, your race, and your income, statistically speaking.
And I feel like that perfectly describes why my parents were teachers. I came from a home in which education was emphasized, which has race and class and gender ramifications. Definitely. So, getting back, speaking of race... Okay,
so nobody's better than David, it turns out. All right.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm
Good
just...
segue, good segue.
So, by 1715, Louis XIV is old as fuck. He is the Joe Biden of his time. He had ruled France for 72 years.
Wow, in 1715?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is old as fuck in 1715. Okay.
Also, his only legitimate heir was a boy of 5 years old, so Louis XIV names a regency council to be led by his nephew, the Duke of Orleans, whatever. On September 1st, 1715, he dies, and the next day, the Regency Council basically is like, nah, fuck everything that guy said. They annul his will, and they declare Orleans the sole regent of the still young new king. It was in this period of political upheaval that a new law was passed, the Edict of 1716, which reaffirmed the principles of the Code Noir, that slaves in the colonies be taught Christianity and be baptized, but it also allowed for French colonial slave owners to bring their slaves with them to France for a prescribed period of time without thereby freeing the slaves.
Wow, okay.
Okay, so Madeline, do you want to talk a little bit about the reliance? Actually, you know what? We'll go a little further.
Okay.
So, the enslaved population of Saint-Domingue grew at an astronomical pace. In 1687, there were 4,411 white colonists and 3,358 slaves. By the middle of the 18th century, black slavery in the colonies had eclipsed engagé labor and had been racialized. By 1700, the enslaved population had grown to 9,052.
Oh, it's the threefold.
And by the...
And wait, that's only in 13 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
By the middle of the 17th century, the enslaved population had grown to 150,000.
Wait, was that the middle of the 18th century?
Oh,
like
yes.
1750s?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
While the white population had in fact declined, when the revolution eventually did break out, over 90% of the population of Saint-Domingue was enslaved.
Wow.
The expansion was fueled by the economic miracle of sugar cultivation. Originally a product of the Middle East, the Spanish and Portuguese pioneered the colonial cultivation of sugar, which demanded a large labor pool, calling back to Eric Williams. Workers often worked all day and night during periods of harvest. The number of plantations in the colony, especially in the northern provinces of Saint-Domingue, grew apace with the growth of slavery. From 1700 to 1704, the number of plantations grew from 18 to 120.
Wow. In 4 years.
4 years.
Whoa.
In 1713, there were 138. By 1754, there were 599 sugar plantations.
In 50 years. Okay.
In the entire period of the French slave trade, France organized over 4,400 slave trading expeditions between the 17th and middle of the 19th, so somewhat outside of the period we're talking, but it's good to keep in mind. A total of between 12 and 13 million people were deported from their homes in modern-day Guyana, Senegal, and the Congo.
Oh my god.
About 15% of them died on the voyage to the colonies.
Wait, can I just do some like comparative math? So like something that always helps me to like understand these numbers is like, what are you talking about when you talk about 13 million people taken from their homes in Africa, right, and sent to go be enslaved?
In a time when the population of places was also much smaller.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, so California's population is 30 million people.
Yeah.
So this is like taking half of California, stealing them from their homes, and forcing them to go be enslaved somewhere. Okay, so 15% of that is... What, 10% is 1.3 million, add an extra 7. That's like 2 million people just died on the way.
Yeah.
So that's like, what, LA has 3 million people?
LA City, which
so
like don't if you tell people that they get confused.
2/3 of the population of the actual city limits of Los Angeles just dying on the way there.
Yeah.
This is such a catastrophic loss of human life, and like beyond that, the people who didn't die right away but were sent to live this tortured, hellish experience for the years they could survive it. This is so many people.
And I want to make clear two things. As we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, there was something in France called the exclusive,
yeah,
which meant that the French colonies could only trade with French ports. They did not always follow that, and that meant that there was a lot of contraband, including contraband slaves, that are not accounted for in these numbers. And also, this is just the number of slaves in the French colonies that we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is not the English, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch... Right.
It's more than this in terms of the people. These are conservative estimates, and this is just what France was up to alone. These are such astronomical numbers. It's that thing where it's like one death is a tragedy, like a million deaths is a statistic. I mean,
Stalin.
This is so many people, and each one of them is like an individual that suffered a horrific experience and died a bad death. And like, I don't know. I think that sometimes it's so easy for us to like skate by this stuff, but like to really have that like human connection and humanize this and think about what this means and how many people this is, it's very overwhelming. Yeah, it's one of those things where again to the Eric Williams stuff about slavery being the foundation of capitalism is really, really fucking important to understand, because at the time, most of the enslaved people destined for Saint-Domingo, under the terms of what I mentioned before, the exclusive, the French ports and Nantes, who performed 1,800 expeditions and over 550,000 people, Le Havre, 520 expeditions, Bordeaux and La Rochelle, 480 expeditions each, flourished.
the French economy was dependent on the slave trade, right? The economies of places that we now associate with fucking wine and shit like that, it was a slave economy first and foremost, even if there are no slaves in France or whatever, because you know, once you set foot on French soil, you're free.
Right.
The economy of France depended on slavery.
Right.
At its height, the economy of Saint Domingo created a tax base of 1 billion livres. Annually, it sent goods worth 150 to 170 million livres to France. In France, to be, quote, rich as a Creole became a common descriptor of extreme wealth. And just so we're clear, they meant Creole as in born in Saint Domingo, not a person of color.
Right.
Okay. So, Madeline, you have some stuff about this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about kind of the economic, impact of this. Mm-hmm. So, how much of what was going on in France really was dependent on their colony? And the answer is a lot, because really, France's economy prior to this was not doing that great. So, like David mentioned, Haiti is... I'm going to go back and forth between calling it Saint Domingue and Haiti. I use them interchangeably, but it is the same region we were talking about. It's just a matter of time. Haiti is the name for it after they became independent. Saint Domingue was the name while they were officially the colony. Mm-hmm. So however you want to refer to it, they were considered, the crown jewel of France. It was the most lucrative colony in France, and Saint Domingue represented 2/3 of France's entire exterior trade. That one colony, right, that we now call Haiti, did more business than all of the English colonies combined. This was massive. They outproduced the entire Spanish Empire in all of the Americas on this one island. So, most of the stuff they're doing, one of the big ones is sugar, like David's talking about. So
Indigo and coffee.
Indigo and coffee as well. But sugar, by the 1700s, sugar was the most important internationally traded commodity. It was massive. It was this... also a thing that, the bourgeois really liked. It was trendy. It was very exciting to the palate, right? So they basically were responsible for 1/3 of the entire European economy just in the sugar trade alone. Mm-hmm. 1/3 of the entire European economy was sugar trading.
Yeah.
Massive. So by 1789, Haiti was exporting over 100 million pounds of sugar every year, nearly 70 million pounds of coffee, 6 million pounds of cotton, and then some other things like indigo, which you mentioned, some other things fell in there. By the end of the 1700s, Saint Domingue produced 40% of the sugar and 60% of the coffee in total imported to Europe. Mm-hmm. So everything that got going on in Europe, say you're just going to a store, say you're just doing your thing, 40% of the sugar on the shelves there is made with slave labor. 60% of the coffee you're buying is made with slave labor.
Well, it's all made with slave labor.
It's all made with slave labor, coming from this one specific place, though.
Saint Domingue, Haitian slave labor.
Coming from Haiti. So to make this happen, think about everything economically that needs to occur to get that coffee, to get that sugar from Haiti to your grocery store, right? Yeah. If you are just a French person. If you're of the French upper class, we're going to say.
May I make one interjection?
Yeah.
We're calling it France, and it was like an absolute monarchy or whatever, but up to the Revolution, you would probably identify, if you were like a French person, chances are you would identify as being from Nice or whatever, right? The idea of being French in the sense that we now think of it was kind of a product of the Revolution. Right.
So a lot of this is Paris that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. They're talking about Paris in particular. So think about all of the economic things that have to happen to get that to you. It's you got to get boats. You got to get ports, right? And then you got shipbuilders, right? And you got all these people who maybe themselves directly aren't even associated with the slave trade, but their entire economy and their livelihood depends on the slave trade. You could be I just build ships. I'm just a little ship captain. Okay, well, your ships are either probably transporting enslaved people or the product made by enslaved people. Mm-hmm. So all of the economy of France gets super, super wrapped up in colonization. And the colony that is the largest by far is the one we call Haiti now, that at the time was Saint Domingue. So they employed 1,000 ships and 15,000 French sailors just from this Saint Domingue trade alone. Many of the coastal ports of France relied on the slave trade, obviously. They were outfitting slaver ships. That was an industry, heading to Africa and then importing the crops from the West Indies. And back in France, obviously, the bourgeoisie was prospering from this relationship. So we're aware that by 1798, clearly, we're aware there was a massive wealth gap that had developed in France, because that's what led up to the revolution. I think most of us know that. We got to a point where the rich were extremely rich, the poor were extremely poor within France. The rich obviously were a class of nobility or bourgeois business owners, but all of them, a lot of them, got very, very rich because they were profiting greatly off of things like colonization. So in the 1700s in France, the proportion of national wealth held by the top 10% was about 90%. And the fraction possessed by the top 1% was 60%. So 1% in particular of people in France were holding 60% of the wealth. And this wealth was relatively new because France up to this point had been kind of like a peasant agrarian farming community without traditionally a great economy as we think of it. So their wealth that all of a sudden was coming about, right, was coming from these colonies like Saint-Domingue, mostly Saint-Domingue. So Sanjay Kumar talks about this and says, the development of capitalist enterprise, trade, commerce, and industry, the bourgeois class, came to play an ever more important role in the life of the nation. Kumar also explains that the half of the century from 1730 to 1778 in particular was a period of rapid economic advancement for France, who up to this point had been, yes, more agrarian, more peasant-based. And this advance was pretty much driven by the riches France was able to extract directly from Haiti. So the extraction of resources also created a new consumer class of the bourgeoisie and their families who just suddenly were shopping for things like clothes and coffee, which also greatly positively impacted the economy of France and the ruling class in France. So Suzanne Dizon talks about this and says, Louis XIV and his successors recognized that colonial products could also be a lucrative source of tax revenues, but that they could also rival domestic production. Seeking to tax and regulate the new consumer goods, the state made ever more use of tax farmers, the farmers general, or sometimes just called farm, the same set of financiers who levied indirect taxes on salt and other domestic goods. So the crown not only endowed the farm with a monopoly on processing, selling, and taxing Atlantic tobacco in France, it also gave the farm the job of policing illegal sales of contraband. So like David said, there were like black markets popping up for this stuff that were not as regulated. An entire economy in France just revolved around this type of product coming in from Haiti. And Louis the 16th even was profiting greatly from colonization. It started with Louis the 14th, kind of where we start thinking about this in a major way. By the time we get to Louis the 16th, we've got all sorts of wealth hitting France. It's no longer the agrarian peasant economy. Like Louis the 16th, by the time we get to number 16, his lifestyle includes a personal military guard of over 9,000 soldiers, a civilian household that numbered around 4,000 servants, like 30 were required just to serve the king his dinner. 4 people just had the task of filling his glass with water or wine. He had 128 musicians. He had 75 religious officials that were just dedicated to him privately. He had 48 of his own doctors. And he had 198 persons who were classified as caring for his body. Yeah, I don't know. It's very, very weird.
I'm sorry. That will not appear on the podcast, but I gave Madeline a fucking look.
Yeah, caring for his body. I don't know. 198 people. I'm not assuming great things. So, by 1780, France had grown like completely dependent on colonies like Haiti. This is where they were getting their wealth from, because before that, they were considered a pretty poor country. Yeah. Honestly, they didn't have too much going on. And the type of wealth that developed in France was also very uneven. It came from like a very uneven exploitative source, right? The workers doing all of this, the enslaved people, treated horrifically. And then by the time it got to France, it was really only benefiting the top, 10%, and especially the top 1% of people living there, the nobility, the people who were kind of this newly emerging merchant class who were doing some of the work around it, like shipbuilding or
and they were feeling,
coffee.
I'm imagining, quite frustrated because of the quote-unquote exclusive. Right, they couldn't... It was like, right, if you look at it, the Revolutionary National Assembly, I think the thing is like 15% of them had plantations in Haiti.
Yeah.
Which, like, because they're like, if you're like a French slaver or a French plantation owner, you're like, motherfucker, I can only trade with France?
Yeah.
The Spanish are right there.
Right. And, you know, this was... The economy of France, even with the boom from Haiti, wasn't awesome, like, because things were so uneven and bizarre, and France was trying to really regulate the economy in that way, like David was talking about, setting up all these protections and trade rules, and it ended up really adversely affecting the country. And obviously the rich weren't paying taxes, just the poor were paying taxes, which was another issue that they ran into. So they were trying to tax these goods to kind of make up to it. Basically, by the time we get to 1790, inflation is like running rampant in France. They're doing their best to try to curb it. But the people who had been profiting for the past, almost 100 years or so from colonization, the bourgeoisie, they were largely fine. They were not the ones experiencing the impact of this kind of inflation and these issues. Like financiers, merchants, commodity speculators, they normally participated in international trade, and they often had enough resources by this point, because of the profit they made off colonization, to totally protect themselves from the effects of things like inflation, which we see here today in the United States as well. The rich are able to kind of protect themselves. So this was the same situation in 1790 France. The rich were accumulating gold and silver. They were sending it abroad for safekeeping, right? Think like offshore bank accounts, right? Quite literally, but they were doing it with gold and silver. And they also were investing in things like art and precious jewelry. Art, like art trading. This is what the rich do today. They use art to launder their money and keep it safe.
I bet you they found a guy named Rim Koolhaas even back in... Okay, first of all, I will say, this is completely off topic. Rim Koolhaas's book, Delirious New York, one of the best books on urban geography ever written.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like am I allowed to say psychotic? Is that...
I don't know. I say it, but that's because I once had a psychotic episode, so I feel like I'm allowed.
It is a hallucinatory, or might I say delirious type book.
Delirious is good. We've all been delirious.
Well, no, because it's called Delirious New York.
Yeah.
Anyway, but no, Rem Koolhaas these days is mostly known for building offshore storage facilities for art. Yeah,
it's pretty interesting. We actually have a whole episode about the art trade and the politics of it. If you guys want to listen, it's one I did back with Kenna back in the day. It's called He Who Smelt It Dealt It, unfortunately, and it's about art dealing. Or it's called Who Arted in Here?
I'm giving you a face.
I know. It's pretty bad. Okay, anyway. So the important thing you need to know about how much France was depending on the colonization of Haiti and the enslavement of these people is what you really need to know is the rich, it's what made them rich in France. When we talk about the conditions leading up to the French Revolution, which many of us are kind of just casually familiar with, and we will end up talking about probably in the second part of this episode.
Yeah.
When we get to what created those conditions that really made the wealthy super, super wealthy while the poor were not, the wealthy were getting wealthy from colonization. And these people who had experience in like speculation from colonization, they were staying ahead of inflation. They were actually profiting from currency fluctuations. They were just getting richer and richer and richer. So Haiti was essential basically for the development of France's economy from that rural, poor, peasant, agrarian economy into the thing we think of today as being like this marker in our heads of great wealth run amok. And
it created, this is the thing that sort of created France as we know it. At the time, the French Ancien Regime, the Louis XV and 16 bullshit.
Yeah.
They were pursuing this mercantilist policy that I talked about earlier, the Principe de l'exclusif. The exclusive. We're just going to say the exclusive.
And so this is what we're talking about when we say just like our government today. It's like, well, the rich will create protections for themselves.
Yeah. And so this required that goods be produced in the colonies be only sold in the French metropole, and that French colonists purchasing anything they needed, they purchased it from French merchants who charged massive markups because they understood that they had a captive market.
Yeah, you've got a captive market. Exactly. People have to shop with you, so you can charge whatever you want.
Which, ironically meant that, like, a lot of the plantation owners became a part of the Revolutionary Assembly because they were pissed at, like, the monarchy.
Very fascinating.
Like, they were just like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah, fascinating development.
All right, Madeline, do you have more, or are we good?
So that's kind of all I've got about the economy. I think that the thing you really have to just, like, know is that so much sugar was getting produced in Haiti, and sugar was one of the driving factors of the entire European economy, and Haiti was one of maybe the biggest colony that Europe any country in Europe had going on. So when we think about how massive and major Haiti was sugar in particular was to the economic development of Europe, you can replace sugar with Haiti.
Yeah, so, it's, which also, I want everyone to keep in mind modern Haiti. Like, I think that, I don't know how else, but, like, right, think about just how physically small of a country it is. Think about the ways in which we talk about Haiti as a kind of watchword for a sort of failed state, right? I don't know. I don't...
No, it's important because it's like when you look at these places, very often these things have been done to them, and they have their resources have been extracted, their sovereignty has been compromised, they have been brutalized by people like us.
Yeah, so...
And we'll see later as Americans, literally by us.
Yeah.
We'll probably see in next week's episode that.
It's been bad. So Laurent Dubois writes that, quote, "We'll never know exactly how many slaves were brought to Saint-Domingue." I'm just going to say it like you, Saint-Domingue.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Estimates range from 850,000 to about 1 million. Even though it became a full-fledged plantation society later than other Caribbean colonies and was destroyed decades before the end of the Atlantic slave trade, the Saint-Domingue accounted for perhaps 10% of the volume of the entire Atlantic slave trade.
That's wild. Again, for such a small place. I also want to say I was struck by the years as I was doing this. I think, like, when you first start learning about things that happened in history, you're like, oh, like, 1780, that was so long ago. But you really think of it in the context of, like, how time passes, and you're like, that was basically 1800. That's not that long ago. That was like 200 years ago. Like, my grandma lived to be 100.
I mean, I think the thing that strikes me is that from, like, the end of the 17th century, when Saint-Domingue became officially a French colony, to... Like, it's 100 years. It's 100 years.
This is, like, one generation.
Right.
And it was not that long ago. It was relatively late. Like, we saw the colonizations of the Americas as we think of them start, like, what, in the 1300s, 1400s? But, like, we see this happening. Obviously, the Spanish were there, and Christopher Columbus was there earlier. But this whole period of the French colonization, it started pretty late in the game. And it didn't stop them from extracting every drop of resources they could from this land. So
I will say, the slave trade, we all know it's brutal, and that's not something I'm going to linger on because I don't really want, like, I feel like it's excessive to talk to. Like,
we don't want to be excessive.
So enslaved children died at incredible rates on the plantation system, sometimes nearly as high as 50% in bad years, and the death rate among children was 5 to 6% annually.
Wow.
Technological advances could yield greater profits to those who with capital to finance them. Plantations who could separate sugar from molasses were more profitable. As I mentioned, the exclusive system meant that goods made in Saint-Domingue were supposed to be exclusively sold in France, but they weren't. The material conditions of Saint-Domingue, with slightly less than half a population owned by absentee landholders in France, they were among the wealthiest. So that's the other thing, right? The general idea is you would go to Saint-Domingue for a few years, like, shop the Zillow, buy a plantation, schedule a bunch of slaves, and then you'd hightail it back to France. Like, you're not trying to stay in the colony if you can help it, if you're a French rich guy.
Right.
Absentee landholders vested control of the plantations in the hand of a procurer with power of attorney, who in turn hired gérants, managers, to oversee the day-to-day labor of the plantation. The procurers rarely visited the plantations themselves, which meant that the greater number of the plantations were basically mismanaged. One planter opined that of 100 plantations being run by managers, 95% were in ruins, while their managers had grown rich.
Wow.
One rung beneath the managers were drivers who had no material interest in the maintenance of the plantations. If the ownership class of the wealthiest plantations of Saint Domingo was French, residing in France, the drivers were almost universally Creole-born in Saint Domingue. And you have to understand what this had. There's no not fucked up way to talk about this.
Yeah. They're like middle managers for death.
Yeah, but so if you are the... there's no non-fucked up way to talk about. If you are the owner of the slaves, presumably you spent money on them. And you see that as a fixed capital cost, and you might, this was abolitionist thinking at the time, have some interest in their preservation. If you were a manager whose only sort of motivation was to extract as much profit from the slaves in as short a period of time as possible, you did not care because you got a percentage of the wealth generated by the plantation. So you, like, the system was designed to create cruelty.
Right. Yeah, and they were like, it's easier to just replace people if they die doing this rather than to keep them alive.
The funny thing, and this is something that I learned, colonists in Saint Domingue were extremely discerning when it came to the origins of the slaves purchased for work in the colonies.
No, this makes sense to me because they're viewing them as objects. They're not viewing these as people. It's the same way people are like, well, is it like a Japanese car? Mm-hmm. Is it like a French wine? It's an object, and we associate certain locations with making products well. And I think this is also like the Marxist kind of thing about where enslaved people fit in. Is it primitive accumulation or is it labor? And it's like the colonizers are viewing them as objects, not labor, right? So it makes sense to me that they're just like, commodity fetishism, right? We're assigning these special values to things we see as commodities, and I get how Marx positioned, right, slavery as being primitive accumulation and enslaved people as commodities, because that's how the colonizers were viewing them, as a thing. And they were applying those same ideas. We're like, ooh, well, the ones you get from this region are fancier and better and have special qualities. Whereas it takes a black Marxist to say, no, we were laborers. Yeah. We were workers. And that's why the work of black Marxists is so important in kind of clarifying that distinction. But also you see how Marx reached that conclusion, because that is how the plantation owners, the colonizers, were thinking about them as objects, and certain objects from certain regions are considered more special. And
okay, so the largest source of slaves was West Africa, supplied initially through Portuguese raids into the interior from the port of Luanda. Saint Domingo colonists categorized these slaves as, quote, Congo, and they accounted for about 40% of the imports over the course of the 18th century. Those planters who could expressed preferences for certain nations, quote unquote, of slaves. Many sugar planters preferred the Arata, whom they saw as good agriculturalists. Some noted that Congo women had traditionally been given the task of working in the fields, and so were more desirable for field work than men. Moreau de Sainte-Marie, traveling through the colony, wrote that the Senegalese were very sober, very clean, and most of all, quiet.
Oh, God.
One sugar plantation became a veritable ethnic microcosm of the slave trade. Of the 348 slaves on it, 58 were Congo, 28 Ibo, 55 Nagos, 13 Bambara, 25 Arata, 25 Mines, and 13 Moroquis, and 16 Sosos. Some planters even placed newly arrived slaves under the tutelage of a slave on a plantation who came from the same homeland in order to facilitate their integration into plantation life. The enslaved were called and sometimes called upon their homelands, and one voodoo song, this, by the way, is from Du Bois, recorded in the 1950s, probably a relic from the days of slavery. A singer calls upon the king of Congo to look at what they are doing to me. One of the legacies of this cosmopolitanism among this enslaved population of Saint-Domingue was the emergence of Haitian Creole as a language, which borrowed French dialect and adapted it to the varied languages of the enslaved. Additionally, the people deported into slavery in Saint-Domingue brought with them their religion. In the beginning of the 18th century, Arata people brought with them the traditions of Fon and Yoruba. When the Congo slaves became the majority, the varied African traditions they brought with them blended into a syncretic thing called voodoo. As Du Bois puts it, out of the highly industrialized and regimented plantations, there emerged a powerful set of religious practices that celebrated and reflected the human struggles of those who participated in them. Religion was, in some sense, a space of freedom in the midst of a world of bondage, and helped lay the foundation for the revolt that ultimately brought complete freedom to the slaves. Plantation owners were very, very careful to break up kinship bonds among the slave populations. Their names were changed, their bodies branded, and they were chained together. In 1785, Gerard Contrans, a Swiss traveler visiting the colony, he described working conditions of the slaves thus. The slaves numbered roughly 100 men and women of different ages, all engaged in digging ditches in a cane field, most of them naked or dressed in rags. The sun beat straight down on their heads. Sweat ran from all parts of their bodies. Their arms and legs, worn out by excessive heat, by the weight of their picks and by the resistance of the clayey soil, became so hardened that it broke their tools. The slaves nevertheless made tremendous efforts to overcome all obstacles. A dead silence reigned among them. In their faces one could see human suffering and pain they endured, but the time for rest had not yet come. The merciless eye of the plantation steward watched over the workers while several foremen dispersed among the workers and, armed with long whips, delivered harsh blows to those who seemed to be too weary to complain about the pace and were forced to slow down. Men, women, young and old alike, none escaped the crack of the whip. Women were especially... This is, by the way, it's just going to be a lot of hard for a hot second.
And this is also... I mean, this is not even the most graphic things that
no,
these people were
I have one quote that's from C.L.R. James that's pretty fucking graphic, but I try to not be gratuitous.
So this is us, gratuitous, that's the word. We're not trying to be gratuitous, this is it pared back.
Women were especially vulnerable. Carolyn Frick observes they were responsible for both production and reproduction, excluded from the most prestigious occupations, drivers, sugar boilers, and artisans and the like. Most of them worked in the fields. Those who worked as domestics were in particular in danger of rape and other forms of abuse from their masters. While within the slave population, the colonists created a strict hierarchy, at the top of which was the Creole slave overseer, followed by a skilled or domestic slaves with common laborers at the bottom. And here's the part that needs the content warning. Because the owners were absentee landlords, the overseers, in attempting to exert as much labor from the enslaved population as possible, were almost unimaginably cruel in their treatment. While delivering the whip, it was common practice to burn a piece of wood on the slave's buttocks or to pour pepper, salt, lemon, ashes, or quicklime on the slave's open and bleeding wounds. Carolyn Fick writes, other examples exist of slaves being thrown into hot ovens, consumed by fire, tied to a skewer or above an open fire and roasted to death. This is the fucked up one. Other overseers punished slaves by dragging them with horses. Women had their genitals mutilated. Others had boiling cane sugar poured over their head or were forced to eat their own excrement. Saint Foch, one of the largest and wealthiest plantation owners of St. Domingo, cautioned prudence in punishing the slaves in his manual for treatment, The Instructions. He wrote, "Slow punishments make a greater impression than quick or violent ones. 25 lashes of the whip, administered in a quarter of an hour, interrupted at intervals to hear the cause which the unfortunates always plead in their defense, and then resumed again, continuing in this fashion 2 or 3 times, are far more likely to make an impression than 50 lashes administered in 5 minutes, and less a danger to their health."
So, methodical and clinical and cruel.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
C.L.R. James, writing in the Black Jacobins, and I will not be saying this word, reports that among the punishments was the practice of filling them with gunpowder and blowing them up, such that, quote, "to burn a little powder in the arse of an inward" became a common saying in the colony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's degradation, it's sexual humiliation, it's just pure violence. And this is what we mean when we're like, anything you hear of happening to one person on a true crime podcast, colonization did to hundreds of thousands and potentially millions of people all around the world.
Yeah, and I don't want to be gratuitous, but I think there is an actual ideological and important point to be made here, which is the point that Eric Williams makes about how the racialization of slavery became the justification for the economic reality of slavery, which means that the cruelty, which became the sort of everyday lives of the slaves, and we're going to talk about their resistance, which is the cooler part in a second. I don't know how to say this without being like, spare a thought for the villains. Think about what it does to the moral conscience, moral being of a person who engages in that kind of behavior. That is degradation, like to become the kind of person who does that.
Right.
Like that was created, that cruelty, that poverty of soul, I don't know how else to say, was created by the economic conditions of slavery, which was the foundation of capitalism. I don't know, does that point?
I mean, maybe. I mean, it's an interesting thing to consider. I don't know. I think that the only way you can be okay doing this to another human being is if you've so dehumanized them that you don't see that they are human. Like, you don't see their humanity. They've ceased to become a human being to you. And, like, that's why, like, racialization we see has a lot of positive effects for capital, right? Number one, it prevents exploited people of different races from joining together to fight off a common enemy, right?
Yeah.
Number two, it makes it easier for exploited people of your race to look down upon and treat exploited people of a different race as subhuman, because they're like, well, at least I'm human. This person's not. Like, so it is an effective tool of maintaining the flow of capital in one direction, which is up. And it's harrowing, and it's absolutely revolting to think about the fact that it became such an effective way to make human beings do horrible, horrible, horrible things to each other.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, like, forgive me for having a normative view of human beings, though I will say this is a normative view that Marx shared, at least as far as the Grundrisse. However, there is a specific kind of human good that this is not it. This is not it. And I like behaving thus feels contrary to any human good that I can think of. Yeah. Right? And to be so morally deformed that you think of this as normal feels like one of the legacies of early capitalism, of the slave system, of the transatlantic slave trade. Does that make sense?
I think that's fair. I think it's like the same way where people, like American soldiers, we hear stories of them going off to war in Korea and Vietnam, and they do horrible things, and they come back and they're like traumatized by their own actions, basically, and what they saw. And it's hard because you're like, yeah, I bet it is difficult to realize you did a lot of fucked up, awful things to human beings. You inflicted a lot of pain and violence, but like also you're not the person I'm necessarily concerned about.
Oh yeah, I'm not pleading sympathy. I'm pointing out the fact of the moral degradation. Yeah, right. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. Yeah, it's done through mass. This is also why things like propaganda and like how we think about people from other places and how we think about people who are different than us, and like this is why propaganda is so important, because it does affect our views of humanity. Like, I know lots of times when we talk about propaganda, it seems like it's not that important when you talk about actual human suffering, but it is the tip of the iceberg of human suffering, because it creates the narrative that allows us to feel comfortable either watching people suffer or enacting pain on others.
I'd like to point out, right, again, I mentioned in the introduction to this episode that James was extraordinarily consistent about emphasizing the parallels between 1938 Europe and the slave system. Right. And you gotta imagine that he must have felt, well, I know he did feel both vindicated and a little annoyed, because Europe wasn't fucking cottoning on to the racial logic of fascism. Right. Right, in 1938. Like, they were like, oh, well, we'll figure it out. It's okay.
Or it won't affect us.
It won't affect us. And James was very clearly already like, nah, this is fucked up what Mussolini is doing in Ethiopia. This is the same fucking thing. Mm-hmm. It's coming here, guys. Like,
get ready.
Get ready. Yep. So the Code Noir attempted to ensure the humane treatment of slaves, providing for their food and well-being. However, procurers, hoping to maximize profits, of which they received a share, insisted that on their one day of rest, when they weren't working, slaves provide for their own food by growing on small plots of land adjacent to the plantation. Ironically, however, that this meant that slaves in Saint-Domingue were granted a day in which they were able to visit the marketplace in the regional capitals such as Le Cap, and to form connections between plantations that eventually formed the basis of their revolution. So basically, the thriftiness of the overseers created the conditions for the revolution.
They will sell us the rope we use to hang them.
Yeah. This meant in Le Cap, the streets were often filled with enslaved vendors attempting to sell surplus oranges, pineapples, guavas, papayas, apricots, avocados. Le Cap became home to a special Masse de Nigre after the regular mass, during which slaves and free people of color socialized and gathered to sing songs. After the markets closed, slaves in Le Cap gathered in music and dancing accompanied by drums, calabashes filled with seeds, and hand clapping. The Code Noir specifically forbade gathering together of slaves from different plantations, but slaves often risked punishment, execution in the case of repeat offenders, to go to gatherings across different plantations. In practice, the ban proved basically impossible to enforce. There's one case I want to talk about, the 1788 case of Lejeune. He was a wealthy coffee plantation owner in Plaisance on the northern plains of the colony. He believed that his slaves were being killed off by poisoning, and I will say, poisoning, especially of other slaves, suicide, abortions, were common forms of resistance among the slaves, or among the enslaved population, where it was like, I will commit suicide and deprive you of labor.
Yeah.
I will kill another slave and deprive you of labor. I will perform an abortion of a pregnant woman. And sometimes, in some instances, enslaved women were given a bonus of money to become pregnant because it created more labor for the colony.
Right.
So, yeah. So Lejeune believed that his slaves were being killed by poisoning, and he put to death 4 slaves that he suspected. He had 2 women he believed to be involved, tortured by fire during an interrogation, and threatened to kill any slave, specifically any slave who spoke French, who denounced him in court. 14 slaves nonetheless came forward. 2 magistrates actually visited the plantation to investigate and found that the women were barely alive, with their legs so badly mutilated that they were decomposing.
Wow.
Lejeune fled, and an initial decision was made against him by the court in Le Cap. However, the white population rallied around him, and his case was dropped. In his defense, Lejeune stated plainly the logic on which slave society rests. My cause, he said, is the cause of every colonist. The unhappy condition of the slave leads him naturally to hate us. It is only by force and violence that he can be controlled. It is not fear of the law or its justice that keeps the slave from stabbing his owner. It is his awareness of the master's absolute power over him. If you remove this restraint, there is nothing he will not dare.
He said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, which is like, we have to do this. And it was a common saying that the word of a black man can never be equal to that of a white man in the colony, for specifically that reason. And earlier in the 1750s, the Code Noir was expanded to include the ability of slaves to testify, and this was sort of the test case of that, and it failed. Right. An intermediate class of mixed race and free people of color became a problem for the colonial government. One French military officer, by the way, we're going to get some, that's going to be redolent of modern forms of racism coming up.
Okay.
Is stationed in Saint-Domingue during the American Revolution, reflecting on the complex racial hierarchy that existed in Saint-Domingue, wrote this: people of a sensitive disposition would be shocked to see the licentious manners of Saint-Domingue. From generation to generation, the free people of color have maintained an extreme proclivity for following the dictates of love. The mulatto and quadroon women, taking advantage of their debauchery, have competed with white women for the hearts of white men, and they have won.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
He's like, these women are hot.
Oh, wait, it gets so...
This is so weird.
It's... I don't know how to say it. It's still dark. Everything's dark in this. Yeah, but this is just the absurdity of his racism.
Yeah.
Is
he's scandalized that people find the women attractive.
Yeah.
You're like, my guy, misogyny and patriarchy and sexism transcends racism. It's all part of it. It's all in there.
So this means they have the social elite and the majority of colonists for lovers. He continues, mulatto, quadroon, and black women dress with taste and use their appearance, their height, and their walk as an invitation to seduction.
Wow.
In truth, they put this stylishness to good use as a sort of call to sensuous pleasure.
Wow. He's like, I am being tempted so much by the attractive, beautiful, stylish women. They're doing it on purpose because they want to control me.
So
I'm repulsed because I'm also a racist.
Yeah, and I wanted to, like, one of the things that this quote brings out, and one of the reasons I wanted to include it, is for obvious reasons that it is stupid and nonsensical, the specific racial hierarchy of color is stupid and nonsensical. However, the colonists in Saint-Domingue and throughout the French colonial system had a bananas complex system that included mulatto, quadroon, all of like these like where it was these exceptionally fine distinctions where it was like, well, you're a quadroon if it's a white person and a person who had one black parent and one white parent. That like right, that kind of bullshit. And this kind of brings...
It's like blood quantum.
Yeah, it's very fucked up.
I hope I'm using that phrase correctly, actually. I
am. So this also created this complex racial hierarchy within Saint-Domingue society with a population of free people of color. When the revolution broke out, the free population of color in Saint-Domingue rivaled that of the white population at about 27,000, both in number but also in social status. So they actually owned about 1/3 of the plantations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Social status, however, was rigidly policed. Both the mulatto, and again, I'm not using that. That's what.
These are the terms that were used at the time to describe people, and there was like a caste system.
It was a caste system.
Yeah.
And the free black population had to serve in the marechaussee, the colonial police tasked with apprehending marooned slaves and to supply their own weapons. Ugh. A testimony given by a free person of color, Julien Raymond, and here's how fucking granular this got. He was himself a wealthy planter whose grandparents were white, but was himself considered a quadroon. In the colonies, described the state of social degradation imposed on him. Quote, if a white man desires the property of a man of color, or, can I say it, without disgust, his wife or his daughter, they have to be yielded to him, or the white will use violence and ill treatment against the man of color. He will sometimes be beaten in his own house, and the whites will get off scot-free once he utters these 4 words, the mulatto disrespected me. So there was this intermediate class that did not initially take part in the revolution. The free people of color, the quote-unquote mulatto class, who were, like, oftentimes on the side of, like, they were sort of on the side of the plantation owners.
Sometimes they were plantation owners.
Because sometimes they were plantation owners, and they were like, God damn, the French Revolution is happening, we're going to get our rights. And then when that kind of fell through, all hell broke loose.
Got it.
So again, the enslaved population brought with them their religious and kinship ties, including voodoo, which became a means of transmission of resistance between Creole and African-born slaves. Writes Frick, it facilitated secret meetings as well as the initiation and adherence of slaves of diverse origins, provided a network of communication between slaves of different plantations who gathered secretly to participate in the ceremonies, and secured the pledge of solidarity and secrecy of those involved in plots against their masters. Owing to conditions within the colony, there was growing resistance. The most striking example of this is the Makandal poisoning, but I actually have to get to there's some like Abbey who comes. This is a story that's in one of his journals where he's like, yeah, man, if you're in like Le Cap and like you're like walking with a woman, sometimes you'll see a group of like enslaved people on their day off, right when they're at the marketplace or whatever, and they won't let you pass. And then you're like, hey, my this woman needs to pass. Let the woman pass. And they'll say, fuck you, motherfucker. And it's really in the source book on documents for the Haitian Revolution. It's like so many words that I would not say are in it, and then motherfucker is crossed out. And I'm just like, fucking
They're like, that's a step too far. The slurs we're fine with.
So, Makandal, we're going to start with his execution. He was executed by fire in January of 1758, wearing a sign that read Seducer, Profaner, Poisoner, which, gotta say, pretty fucking cool title for
it is a good
man
title.
In these conditions. He would grow to become so legendary among the population of Saint-Domingue that it became a punishable offense to pass between slaves tokens called Makandals that were named after him. Like,
wow.
Right. He was a slave born in Guinea. His occasional invocations of Allah, writes Du Bois, suggest that he was a Muslim and from West Africa. His name, however, may have been derived from the Congo word amulet, and he was a slave on a plantation in the Limbe province of the northern region of Saint-Domingue and had lost one arm to an accident in the sugar mill. And by the way, there are the reports, or the Saint-Domingue newspaper notices of fugitive slaves, marooned slaves, are like a dictionary of mutilations. It's always missing an arm, smallpox, scars, things like that. So missing an arm was probably very common. After he ran away and gathered a large band of maroon slaves in the mountainous interior of the country in order to attack plantations, he was most notorious for poisoning, which he developed from native plants on the island, though it does seem like there's some controversy about this because people can't really know, and it might be the case that that was essentially propaganda on his part, and that it was basically arsenic with native plants.
Got it.
And he distributed the poison to an extensive network of slaves across the northern plains of Saint-Domingue. One contemporary account puts him as the leader of 50-some Maroons. This, by the way, is from Frick. On the summit of a nearly inaccessible mountain, they had their women, their children, and their well-cultivated farms, sometimes armed bands of this type, descended at Makandal's orders to spread terror and ravage plantations of the neighboring plains, or to extinguish those who had disobeyed the prophet. So this was from the founding of Saint-Domingue as a slave colony. Slaves or enslaved people would maroon themselves. They would just flee to the interior. If you were a couple years into Saint-Domingue as a slave, you had a better chance of succeeding because you knew the terrain. You also probably spoke the creolized language, and so could communicate with other slaves.
So what you would really want to do is you would want to work for a little bit, try to survive, and then just wait for the right moment when you knew the land better, and you're like, okay, here's my chance. I'm making a run for it, and I'm going to do my best to survive on my own.
Though, remember that mortality rates were especially high and were the highest for newly arrived slaves in the colony.
So if you could make it through a couple years, you had a chance.
Yeah.
God, it's so bleak.
So he seems to have recruited his followers from among the enslaved in the marketplaces Le Cap, as well as the free black population. A 1757 poisoning report issued by the government after his arrest and the discovery of his plot, which we'll get to, lists 12 enslaved people and 6 free people of color. And it seems like free people of color, having more mobility, were able to work as intermediaries to spread poison throughout Le Cap and throughout the northern provinces. So Makandal survived 12 years in marronage, and his plan, which was discovered before it could go into effect, was to poison the water of the whole city of Le Cap, after which his adherents on the plantations would rise up and massacre the white owners.
Wow.
The 1757 report states that we are alarmed to discover almost all the guilty are those who work in the master's house.
And they were alarmed to discover that because they're like, they're like us.
They're the domestic slaves.
They interact with us all day. They would love us. I can't believe they wanted to kill us and be free. And what? Like, that just showcases the delusion.
So, in whom was placed the greatest confidence?
Who?
The slaves.
Oh,
the coachman, the cook, and other domestics
yes.
at our disposition. This is the part that's especially galling. Note that all the guilty ones are highly priced slaves. And even at 4,000 to 5,000 livres each, they are not to be spared.
Wow.
At his execution...
So he's like, these ones cost us money, but they still gotta go.
Yeah.
It's so wild. It's... Okay.
So Makandal at one point rolled out of the flames and had to be rolled back in and tied down to the stake. He had told his followers prior to his execution that he would not be killed but would be transformed into the fly, and his rolling out of the fire seemed to confirm that for many of the enslaved population who witnessed his death. Among the enslaved population of Saint-Domingue, it became legend that he had, in fact, escaped. So we need to take one step back here and distinguish between what historians sometimes call restorationist and revolutionary rebellions in pre-revolutionary Haiti. Restorationist meaning that it aimed at a return to the conditions of African society prior to enslavement, and revolutionary meaning the establishment of a new revolutionary society. But I don't think, like, Fick and Du Bois point out, and it seems like historiography about Haiti has more or less agreed that this is not a helpful distinction, but it is a distinction that sort of haunts historiography of Haiti. Such distinctions aren't really helpful. In the Makandal case, for example, the blending of African folk traditions, including voodoo, with the revolutionary aim to exterminate the white population oppressing them, worked in tandem to condition one another. Writes Frick, here then was a case of a maroon band with a formidable leader operating in a permanent state of marronage, but one that extended itself at the same time to set afoot a vast movement of resistance. A more contemporaneous historian, Devassier, wrote of Makandal, Makandal was more than simply a leader of maroon bands, not that he disdained pillaging and ransacking of plantations or the theft of cattle and other ordinary exploits of fugitive slaves, but he seemed at the same time to have seen the possibility of creating out of marronage a center of organized black resistance against the whites. So, according to legend, he is said to have placed 3 scarves and a jar of water before his followers. The first scarf he pulled out was yellow, and he said, this is the people who once lived here, meaning the indigenous people. The second scarf he pulled out was a white scarf, and he said, this is the people who live here now, meaning the slave-owning class. And the final one was a black scarf. And here I kind of want to return to C.L.R. James, and my reasoning is this. James's composition is kind of sometimes described as relatively un-Marxist. I know we're going long. Where are we on time?
We're at 2 hours, so we could wrap up this episode and we could hit the rest of it and really talk about the revolution and the rebellions next week if you wanted to wrap.
Well, we're almost at the, this is going to make it a long one. Is that okay?
What, the whole episode?
We're not doing the whole fucking thing. No, we haven't even gone to the goddamn revolution.
No, I know.
We're going to do this, the Bookman case, and then we're out. How does that sound?
I think let's wrap up this and then we'll start with the Bookman case.
Okay.
We're 2 hours. We gotta do it in chunks for you guys here.
Oh, okay.
And your computer is dying. I see the low battery.
Oh my god. Okay. So James is sometimes thought of as specifically his, the Black Jacobins is often thought of as a relatively un-Marxist work. He tends to make it a heroic history that is about people rather than classes, right? The Makandal case shows the ways, again, going back to Cedric Robinson, that isn't necessarily a correct way of thinking about it, right? Rachel Douglas, one of a writer who wrote this fabulous book about the Black Jacobins, talks about the fact that, especially in relation to Froude, the racist historian,
yes,
he was emphatic about his desire to take the passive voice out of Haitian history and make it an active voice, because he thought of his history obviously as a history, but he also thought of it as a specifically didactic thing. And so he's trying to show that the people of Haiti are agents of history, and to do that means to have characters like Makandal, like Bookman, and Toussaint Louverture, who we'll talk about next week. So this is him quoting from Marx's 18th Brumaire, and then his gloss on it. And by the way, this is, if you're looking for the classic superstructure definition, this is it.
Okay.
You never have to actually read the 18th Brumaire. You can just read this fucking thing. Upon the different forms of property, upon the social conditions of existence as foundation, there is built a superstructure of diversified and characteristic sentiments, illusions, habits of thought, and outlooks on life in general. The class as a whole creates and shapes them out of the material foundation, and out of the corresponding social tradition and education may fancy themselves to be the true determinants, the real origin of his activities. On this common derivation of prejudice, small whites, big whites, and bureaucracy were unified against the mulattoes, more on whom next week. It had been so for 150 years and therefore will always be so. And again, I just want to emphasize the degree to which James is attempting to do something with Haitian history that is honoring Haitian history, but also showing the ways in which Haitian, this revolution can be an inspiration for the Pan-Africanist Third World liberation movements of the 20th century. It became Harlem Renaissance painters were painting portraits of Haitian Revolution heroes.
Wow.
Right. Amy Cesaire was composing poems to it. It was a touchstone for that generation of liberation thinkers. Yeah. All right, we're at 2 hours.
We're at 2 hours. So we're going to end part 1 right now. And next week, we're going to pick up with part 2. Part 2, we're going to talk about the actual revolution.
We haven't even gotten to the big one.
We haven't even gotten to the French Revolution. We haven't gotten to the main revolution. I'm going to talk a little bit about some French people who were abolitionists, who were pushing and fighting for the abolition of slavery, but within a very interesting context that you won't want to miss. And then we're going to talk about kind of the aftermath, which includes an American occupation from 1915 to 1934. Spoiler alert, if you bank with Citibank, you might not want to after you hear that one.
Also, I mean, I'm sorry. This is I've been obsessed with I've been slightly trying to slip it into our conversations, and we will be talking about this on the podcast for 2 months now.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and it's a very inspiring revolution. We're gonna see it is. I mean, it's very inspiring. When we get to it, we're gonna talk about it in detail, and I think that it's gonna be a really good episode next week. I think you guys won't want to miss it. If you haven't joined us over on the Patreon, just a reminder to check it out. It's $2 or $3 a month, depending on what tier you sign up for. There are actually a few spots available on our $2 tier right now. So it's Pick Me Up, I'm Scared on Patreon. You can find us over there. You can get access to a lot of great bonus content. If you don't want to spend a couple bucks a month, though, we totally understand. We're just happy you're here. And you guys know we always try to put the bulk of the info we want to give you not behind a paywall. So we always are going to have those episodes coming on here. You might hear some changes coming up in the near future. We might be partnering, as we mentioned, with Means TV. So stay tuned for more developments on that as well, and the potential going into 2025 of us doing things like video podcasts and other things you might like that David currently looks horrified to consider.
I am going to have to sit on my goddamn hand. The amount of hand gestures where I've almost punched Madeline a few times.
Yeah, you guys should want to see that. David's going to enact physical violence upon me, and I'm going to enact emotional terror upon him. That is our dynamic.
Yeah.
Just kidding. David does not beat me, I promise.
Just the emotional terror.
Just the emotional terror is real. Okay, thanks everybody for being here.